He signs the divorce papers without looking at her. That is the part Vivienne Calloway will never forget, not the papers themselves, not the cold attorney sitting across the mahogany table, not even the way the clock on Adrian Vale's penthouse wall read 11:47 p.m. when her marriage officially ended. What she will never forget is that Adrian Vale, a man who once pressed his lips to her temple and told her she was the only steady thing in his life, could not bring himself to look at her face while he ended it. He slid the papers across the table. He uncapped the pen. He signed. And he stared at the wall. Vivienne picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. She had promised herself that much, whatever happened tonight, her hand would not shake. She signed her name in the same careful script her mother had taught her when she was 7 years old, placed the pen beside the papers, and removed her wedding ring. She set it on top of the signature page, not beside it. On top of it, deliberate, final. Then she stood, picked up the single suitcase she had packed that afternoon, and walked out of Adrian Vale's penthouse without a word. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not cry in the lobby. She did not cry until she was sitting in the back of a cab heading nowhere in particular, and even then it was only 3 seconds, 3 sharp, furious seconds before she stopped herself and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stared out the rain-blurred window and thought, "You always knew this was coming. You always knew. If you want to know what happens next, and I promise you, nothing about this story goes the way you think, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like on this video and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Vivienne Calloway walked into that night, you first need to understand what she was walking away from. 2 years earlier, Vivienne had not chosen Adrian Vale. No one had asked her to choose. Her father, Richard Calloway, had summoned her to his study on a Tuesday afternoon in November, poured 2 glasses of bourbon, one for himself, one for her, which was unusual, because Richard Calloway Nye did not typically offer his daughter bourbon, and told her, with the same tone he used to discuss quarterly earnings, that she was going to marry the eldest son of the Vale family within the month. Vivienne had been 31 years old. She had a graduate degree in financial forensics. She had her own apartment, her own bank accounts, her own client list. She had been dating a man named Theo for 8 months, and while Theo was not exactly the love of her life, she had been reasonably content. She had stared at her father across his desk and said, very quietly, no. Richard Calloway had looked at her the way he always looked at her when she said something he considered naive, patiently, a little sad, the way you look at someone who doesn't yet understand the size of the thing they're refusing. Vivienne, he said, the Vales and the Calloways have been at each other's throats for 11 years. 2 men died last spring. If this marriage doesn't happen, more will die before Christmas. That's not a threat. That's arithmetic. So find another solution. I've been trying to find another solution for 4 years. He set down his bourbon. This is the solution. She had walked out of his study that night, telling herself she would not do it. She spent 3 days telling herself she would not do it. On the 4th day, she called her father back and told him she needed conditions, her own accounts, her own autonomy, a contract that specified the terms. She was not going to be a hostage dressed up as a wife. Richard had agreed to every condition. 2 weeks later, she stood at the end of an aisle and watched Adrian Vale turn to look at her, and she had searched his face for something: contempt, apology, anything, and found only a careful, professional neutrality, the face of a man completing a transaction. She had told herself that was fine. She could work with neutral. She had been wrong about that too. The first 6 months of their marriage were a masterclass in coexistence. Adrian was not cruel. He was not violent. He did not humiliate her in public or threaten her in private. What he did was something harder to name and harder to fight. He simply treated her like a very expensive piece of furniture that had been placed in his home against his will. Courteous, distant, occasionally useful at dinners when he needed a wife beside him who could hold a conversation with senators and CEOs without embarrassing anyone. Behind the closed doors of the penthouse, he went to his study and she went to her room, and they passed each other in the kitchen in the morning like neighbors who had run out of things to say. She had tried, early on. She had knocked on his study door one evening, with 2 cups of coffee, and said she thought they might as well get to know each other, since they were going to be living this way for the foreseeable future. Adrian had looked at the coffee, looked at her, and said he had work to finish. He said it without anger, without coldness, even. He said it the way you decline an offer you never considered accepting. She did not knock on his study door again. What surprised her over time was not the loneliness. She had expected loneliness. What surprised her was the surveillance. Not physical, no cameras in her room, no men following her to the grocery store. Something subtler. She began to notice that whenever she made a planned lunch with a college friend, a weekend trip to see her cousin in Philadelphia, something would happen. A function Adrian needed her to attend. A family obligation that appeared out of nowhere. Her plans would dissolve without anyone ever explicitly canceling them, and somehow she would find herself still inside the penthouse at the end of the week, surrounded by everything money could buy, connected to no one. She mentioned it to her father once, carefully, without specifics. Richard had gone quiet in a way that told her he already knew. He had told her to be patient. He had told her these things took time. 3 months later, Richard Calloway was dead. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside of Boston. The police investigation turned up nothing suspicious. Vivienne had sat at his funeral and watched Adrian Vale stand beside her with his hand, at the small of her back, the picture of a grieving son-in-law, and she had felt something inside her go, very cold and very still. She did not cry at her father's funeral the way she had not cried in the cab. 3 seconds. She allowed herself 3 seconds. Then she pressed it down and packed it away, and decided she would figure out what it meant later. Later never came, because she never felt safe enough for later. The second year of the marriage was different from the first, in ways she couldn't always articulate. Adrian began traveling more. He was gone for weeks at a stretch, and when he returned, he was quieter than before, not his usual professional quiet, but something wound tight, like a man bracing for impact. She noticed he changed his phone twice in 4 months. She noticed the security detail around the penthouse doubled without explanation. She noticed he stopped eating dinner and started keeping a glass of scotch on his desk at 11 in the morning. She asked him once, only once, if something was wrong. He had looked at her for a long moment, longer than he usually allowed himself to look at her, and she had the strange sensation that he was trying to decide something. Then he said, "Everything's fine," and looked away. 2 weeks after that, the attorney arrived. She had come home from a rare afternoon out. She'd managed a 2-hour window to see an old friend from graduate school, which had felt like escaping prison, and found a man in a charcoal suit sitting in their living room with a briefcase on his knees, and sent. Adrian was standing by the window with his back to the room. The attorney had introduced himself and explained, with practiced gentleness, that Mr. Vale was seeking a divorce, and that he had prepared a settlement that he believed she would find more than fair. Lump sum. The apartment in Charleston she'd mentioned once in passing, 18 months ago, in a conversation she hadn't thought Adrian was paying attention to. Health coverage for 5 years. A non-disclosure agreement, which she could review at her leisure. Vivienne had stood in the middle of her own living room and looked at the back of her husband's head. "Adrian," she said. He turned around. His face was the same professional neutral she had memorized in 2 years of marriage. There was something else underneath it now, something that looked almost like she wasn't sure. Exhaustion, or something adjacent to it. "I think this is the right thing," he said. "For both of us." She almost laughed. The sheer audacity of "for both of us," delivered in that flat, reasonable voice, like he was suggesting they switch dry cleaners. "Is there someone else?" she asked. Not because she cared or not, entirely because she cared, but because she needed to understand the geometry of it. She needed to know the shape of what was happening. Adrian held her gaze. "No. Then why now?" He looked at the attorney. The attorney looked at his briefcase. "I think," Adrian said, "that we both deserve something better than this." She had wanted to throw something. She had wanted to grab him by the collar and shake him and say something better than, "What, exactly? You spent 2 years making sure I had nothing else." She did not. She nodded, asked for 24 hours to review the documents, and went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall until her vision blurred. She signed the next evening, not because the settlement was fair, though it was, not because she agreed that this was the right thing, though some part of her understood that staying in a marriage that had never been a marriage was its own kind of erosion. She signed because something in the way Adrian had looked at her, that underneath the surface thing, that almost exhaustion, had told us she couldn't name yet. She signed because she had learned, in 2 years in this world, that when a powerful man suddenly wants you gone, you should find out why before you argue. Took the cab to a hotel downtown, checked in under a credit card she'd kept separate from their joint accounts. Since the beginning, an old habit from before the marriage, one she'd never stopped, and ordered room service she didn't eat, and sat in the bath for 40 minutes trying to feel something definitive. The ring was gone from her finger. She kept looking at the absence of it. At 2 a.m., she called her cousin Margot in Philadelphia, who answered on the third ring, sounding appropriately alarmed. And Vivian told her she'd filed the papers, and she was fine, and she just needed to hear a familiar voice. Margot said she was coming. Vivienne said she didn't need that. Margot said she was coming anyway. At 2:03 a.m., Vivian hung up and tried to sleep. At 3:15 a.m., her phone buzzed with a notification from her primary bank. She picked it up, expecting she didn't know. A balance alert, some automated message. The account was frozen. She sat up, opened the app. Screen told her the account had been flagged for review by the Financial Compliance Division, and that access had been suspended pending verification. She had $52 in her wallet. She opened her secondary account, flagged. Her investment account, flagged. Her hands were steadier than she expected. That was the strange thing, the calmer, the crisis, the steadier she became. It was ordinary life that rattled her. This had the clean, clarifying shape of something she needed to think through fast. She got dressed, slacks, a dark sweater, her good boots, the ones with the low heels she could actually walk in. Packed the room service sandwich she hadn't eaten into a napkin, which was absurd and also practical, and she went downstairs. The lobby of the hotel was empty at that hour, except for the night clerk, and a man in a gray overcoat reading a newspaper near the revolving door. She noticed him because no one reads a physical newspaper at 3 in the morning. She walked toward the elevator instead of the exit sign, punched the button for the 4th floor, rode it up, took the stairs back down to the service exit, and came out on the side street. The gray overcoat was already there. Different man, same coat, or the same man, faster than she expected. She turned in the opposite direction and walked at a pace that was not quite running. She had a flash of something close to absurdity. I've been a financial forensic analyst for 8 years. What am I doing? And then the absurdity passed, and she was just someone moving through empty streets at 3 a.m., trying to think. She thought about Adrian's face when he told her this was right for both of them. She thought about her accounts being frozen within 6 hours of signing those papers. She thought about how those two things might be connected. Pulled out her phone and called the only number she could think of, Ellis Crane, who had worked for her father for 15 years and whose loyalty she had always believed was to Richard Calloway, not to whatever arrangement came after. Ellis picked up on the first ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping. Vivienne, he said, and the way he said it, careful, like he was lifting something fragile, told her he knew. My accounts, she said. Yes. Who? Silence. Then I can't do this on the phone. Ellis. Get to the East Airfield. The private one, not the commercial. Terminal B. Go now. Don't take a car you've used before. Why the airfield? Because that's where you'll be safe. Safe from what? The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Then Ellis said, in a voice she had never heard from him before, quiet, in the way a doctor is quiet when they're choosing their next words, very carefully. Vivienne, you need to understand that the divorce was not the problem. The divorce was someone's solution to a different problem. And that problem is still. The call dropped. She stood on the empty sidewalk and stared at her phone. Then she started moving. Found a car service that wasn't connected to any account Adrian knew about. She'd used it twice before the marriage, and apparently the app had never synced to the joint phone plan, and gave the driver the East Airfield address, and sat in the back seat with the napkin-wrapped sandwich in her lap and watched the city thin out around her as they crossed into the outer boroughs. The airfield was small and dark. Terminal B was a low concrete building with fluorescent lights buzzing in the overhang. The parking lot held 3 cars she didn't recognize. She paid the driver in cash from her wallet 40 of her $52 and got out and stood in the November air with her suitcase and waited. 12 minutes passed. Then the lights came. Not from the terminal. From the access road, 12 sets of headlights, low and moving fast, cutting through the dark in a formation that didn't look accidental. Black SUVs. She counted them, because counting gave her something to do with her mind, while the rest of her was trying to figure out if she should run. And, if so, in which direction. They stopped in a loose arc around the terminal. Not around her specifically, around the building, around the perimeter. Professional. Deliberate. The airfield lights came on. A jet appeared at the far end of the runway, already taxiing. It was sleek and unmarked, and moved with the unhurried authority of something that had never waited for permission. It rolled to a stop at the terminal gate, and the engines dropped to a low, even hum, and the door opened. A man descended the stairs. Vivian had never met Lucien Voss in person. She had heard him discussed in hushed tones, in indirect references, the way you did weather system that hasn't hit your city yet. She knew he ran the East Coast's most sophisticated criminal operation. She knew he and Adrian Vale had a history that went back further than her marriage and ran deeper than the usual territorial disputes. She knew powerful men who were not afraid of much were afraid of him. He was taller than she expected. He walked without the theatrical deliberateness of men who knew they were being watched. He walked like someone who had stopped noticing his own presence a long time ago, which was somehow more unnerving than performance would have been. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her across the distance of the tarmac. The wind was cold. Her suitcase handle was cold in her hand. He said, "Across the distance, you're coming home." Vivienne did not move. She had processed a lot in the past 4 hours. The divorce, the accounts, the man in the gray overcoat, Ellis's fractured warning on the phone, 12 black SUVs at 3 in the morning. All of it she had filed away and kept moving. But those 3 words stopped her entirely, because she knew the name Lucien Voss, and she knew one other thing about him, something she had learned from her father before Richard Calloway died, something her fathers had said with a particular weight, the weight of a man passing along information he believed was important. Lucien Voss does not make a move without a reason. Whatever you see him do, ask what he's not showing you. She looked at him across the tarmac. The SUVs idled. The jet hummed. The fluorescent light above the terminal door buzzed in the wind. She thought about $52 and a frozen bank account and a man who had signed divorce papers without looking at her face. She thought about her father, who was dead. She thought about Ellis saying, the divorce was someone's solution to a different problem. And she picked up her suitcase and walked toward the plane, not because she trusted Lucien Voss. She walked toward the plane because she was smart enough to that trust was not the question yet. And the only question that mattered, the question she intended to have answered before this night was over, was what Lucien Voss wanted with her, badly enough to send 12 SUVs to a private airfield at 3 a.m., and why he called it home. She reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't categorize, not triumph, not satisfaction, nothing as readable as that. Something more like recognition, the look of a man who has been waiting for something to happen and is finally watching it happen. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "until you tell me what's actually going on." Lucien Voss studied her face for a moment. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Not close enough to call that. "Come inside," he said. "What I have to tell you is not something you want to hear standing on a runway." She thought about that. "If you're planning to kill me," she said, "this is a very elaborate setup." "If I wanted you dead," he said, without inflection, "you would not have made it out of the hotel." The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere behind her, a car door opened and closed. Vivian Calloway, who had signed her divorce papers 4 hours ago and had 43 cents left in a physical wallet, and a dead father and frozen accounts, and no plan past the next 10 minutes, climbed the stairs into the jet. Behind her, Lucien Voss followed without hurry. The door sealed. The jet began to move. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a penthouse she no longer lived in. A man who had signed papers without looking at her face sat alone in his study with a glass of scotch and a phone that was no longer ringing, and stared at the ring she had left on top of her signature. Picked it up. He held it in his palm. And for the first time in 2 years, Adrian Vale allowed himself to look like what he actually was. A man who had just done the most dangerous thing he had ever done, in the only way he knew how, and prayed it had not come too late. Dante told her fast, the way you tell something when the ceiling is coming down. The account was structured as a dead drop archive, not hosted on any server that could be seized, but distributed across a chain of encrypted nodes that could only be assembled in sequence. The access key wasn't a password. It was a string of characters embedded in the formatting of one specific counter-signature line. Page 41 of a document Vera had signed 9 years ago in a mid-rise office building, while thinking about what she was going to eat for lunch. The string was invisible to the eye. It read as a formatting artifact, but to the right software applied to the right node address, it would pull every record that network had ever generated. Do you have the document? She said. I have a scan. Where? He reached into his jacket and produced a phone, not his usual phone, a secondary one, the kind she'd learned never to ask about, and pulled up an image file. Page 41. Her signature at the bottom, dated, witnessed. And there, in the spacing between the witness line and the footer, a string of characters so small she had to lean in to read them. They looked like a typographical error, a software glitch. 11 years, and she had never once looked at this document long enough to notice. I need to copy this, she said. Memorize it. Don't write it down. She looked at him. If they take you, he said, and you have it written anywhere. I understand. She looked back at the phone. Read it 3 times. Characters arranged themselves in her memory the way phone numbers used to, before she stopped needing to remember them. Reluctantly, imperfectly, but present. Done. Dante pocketed the phone. Above them, the floor shook again, harder this time, and the battery light flickered. Holt appeared fully in the doorway. We're out of time, he said. East Passage is still clear. We need to move in the next 90 seconds, or we don't move at all. Who's at the gate? Dante said. Reyes's people. Maybe 30 vehicles. Reyes doesn't have 30 vehicles. Holt's face stayed flat. He does now. Dante absorbed that a single second of stillness that Vera had learned to read years ago as the moment he recalculated everything. Then he moved, and she moved with him, and Holt's remaining men closed around them both as they went back into the passage and turned east. Passage was longer than the first one. The concrete was older, the lighting worse, bare bulbs strung on wire rather than fixed fixtures, the kind of installation that had been done quickly and never upgraded. Their footsteps were loud, and Holt kept his radio pressed to his ear with one hand, relaying information in a shorthand Vera mostly couldn't decode. She was processing the name. Reyes. She'd heard it twice, in 8 years of marriage once, when Dante took a phone call at 3 a.m, and she'd caught a single word through the bedroom door, and once when she'd found a name in a document she wasn't supposed to see, and asked about it, and Dante had given her the locked safe expression and changed the subject with enough finality that she'd understood not to try again. Reyes has been waiting for the divorce, she said. She said it to Dante's back. He didn't break stride. Yes, he knew about Bridgeway. He knew about you. Not the specifics. He knew you were connected to the account structure. That's all. He's been waiting for the legal barrier to drop before making a move. Because as your wife, coming after me was a direct act of war. And now I'm your ex-wife. Now you're my ex-wife. He said it without inflection, but she heard something in it anyway, the particular weight of a word that costs something. They reached a metal door at the end of the East Passage. Holt went first, pushing it open into what turned out to be a maintenance shed, tools on pegboards, a riding mower, the smell of old gasoline. A vehicle was already running outside. She could hear it, and 2 of Holt's men were standing at the shed's exterior door with weapons drawn. Holt turned to Dante. 2 vehicles. Back roads to the Kendrick Street location. You and Miss... He caught himself, you and Miss Calloway in the first vehicle. I'm not leaving with you, Dante said. The shed went quiet. Holt stared at him. Sir Reyes didn't bring 30 vehicles for Vera. He brought 30 vehicles for me. Dante looked at Vera when he said it, not at Holt like he was explaining something to her specifically. If I'm in that vehicle with you, they follow both vehicles. If I split off, they follow me. You get her clear. It's not Holt started. That's the plan. That's not a plan. That's a sacrifice play. And if you get taken, I'm not getting taken. Dante said it with the flat certainty of a man who had made his calculation and was not interested in discussing the math. I've got 3 separate extraction routes, and they only have eyes on one of them. I'll be at Kendrick Street in 40 minutes. Holt looked like he wanted to argue further. He looked at Vera instead, which surprised her like he was asking her something without asking it. She looked at Dante, and if you're wrong, then you have what you need to finish this without me. The string in her memory, page 41. 11 characters in a formatting artifact. Planned this too, she said, giving me the key. You planned for the possibility that you wouldn't make it to Kendrick Street. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Vera wanted to say something that was equal to the moment. She didn't have it. The moment was too large, and the shed smelled like gasoline, and Holt's men were waiting at the door. And there wasn't time for anything that mattered. 40 minutes, she said. 40 minutes. She turned and walked to the door without looking back, because if she looked back, she wasn't sure she'd keep walking, and she was very sure that stopping was not something she could afford. The vehicle was an unmarked panel van, sensible, invisible, the kind of thing that moves through suburban roads without registering. She got in the back with Holt and 2 others. The doors closed. The van pulled out, and she watched through a narrow rear window as the shed disappeared behind them, and the estate's tree line swallowed the whole picture. Could not see where Dante went. The drive to Kendrick Street took 37 minutes. She counted them. She sat on a bench seat in the back of a panel van with her hands in her lap and counted every minute, while Holt worked his radio in a low, concentrated murmur beside her, and the 2 other men watched the road behind them through a rear camera mounted on a small screen bolted to the van wall. At minute 14, Holt's radio produced a burst of static, followed by a single code phrase she didn't recognize. His face did something, a tightening around the eyes that he controlled within half a second. What was that? She said. Routine update. Your jaw doesn't think so. He looked at her. For a moment, she thought he'd maintain the professional composure. Then he said, Dante's primary extraction route was blocked. Her stomach dropped. Blocked how? Reyes's people had it covered, which means they knew about it. He paused, which means someone told them. The traitor, still in play. He has other routes. 2 more yes, so we wait. We wait. The Kendrick Street location turned out to be a warehouse that had been converted, at some point, into something functional, a staging area, she guessed, from the equipment stored along the walls. There were people already there when they arrived. 6 of Dante's men and a woman Vera had never seen before, 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back severely, standing at a folding table covered in laptops and documents. She didn't introduce herself. She looked at Vera with the specific assessment of someone who had been briefed on her, and made their own judgments. Carver's dead, the woman said. She said it to Holt, not to Vera. Came through on the medical channel 10 minutes ago. Holt absorbed this with the stillness of a man absorbing bad news he'd already prepared for. He say anything before no. Vera sat down on a crate near the far wall. She did not feel herself sit. She became aware that she was sitting, which was different. Carver, the man on the kitchen floor with his face to the tile. 12 years in the organization, and someone had stood close enough to him, too. She stopped that thought. She'd gotten too good at stopping thoughts like that in 8 years of marriage, knowing exactly where the edge of a thing was and not looking over it. Holt and the woman spoke in low voices for several minutes. Vera watched the warehouse door. She watched the men stationed at the windows. She watched the small screen mounted near the table that showed a live feed of the street outside. Empty, quiet, ordinary. 40 minutes came and went. She didn't say anything. 45. At 48 minutes, one of the men at the window said vehicle in a tone that brought everyone else in the room to attention. Hands went to weapons. Holt positioned himself between Vera and the door without being asked to. The door opened. It wasn't Dante. It was a man named Pryor. She recognized him as one of the men from the courthouse that morning, one of the 12 who'd stepped out of the SUVs. He was breathing hard, jacket torn at the shoulder, a cut on his cheek that hadn't been seen to. He scanned the room, found Holt, and crossed to him immediately. He got out, Pryor said. Route 3. But Reyes had a secondary team waiting on the service road, and he stopped, swallowed. He took a hit. The room processed that in silence. How bad, Holt said. He's mobile, he's moving. Pryor glanced at Vera without meaning to, then back to Holt. He sent me ahead. Said he'd be here in 20 and said. Another glance at Vera. Said to tell her the timetable changed. Changed how, Vera said. She said it directly, over Holt, because she was done receiving information, filtered through someone else's judgment about what she could handle. Pryor hesitated. How, she said again. There's a meet, Pryor said. Reyes requested a meet direct. Tonight. He says if Mr. Veyron doesn't come to the table in, he checked his watch. 4 hours. He moves on the Callaway situation directly. Callaway situation. Her Reyes doesn't meet, Holt said. He never meets. In 15 years, I've never seen the man sit across a table from anyone. He's meeting tonight. Pryor looked at his watch again. 3 hours, 52 minutes. Vera stood up. Where? Ms. Callaway. Where is the meeting? Pryor looked at Holt. Holt looked at Vera with an expression that was beginning to recognize. It was the expression of a man who was realizing that the woman he'd been assigned to protect was not, in fact, the type of person who stayed behind the men with weapons. The Garland Hotel, Pryor said. 22nd floor. Vera walked to the folding table where the gray-haired woman was working. The woman didn't move or make room. She waited, with the patience of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in proximity. You've been tracking Reyes's network, Vera said. She said it as a statement, not a question, because the document spread across the table made it obvious. The woman looked at her, among other things. What's his actual interest in the account? The evidence archive. He already knows what's in it. Presumably he helped build it. So he doesn't want it for information. He wants it destroyed. The woman's expression shifted minimally. That's the working theory. And if I'm the only person who can locate the access point, then what he actually wants is me. Vera looked at the documents. Not dead. Not immediately. He needs me to access it first, so he can verify its location and then have it destroyed. And then he can do whatever he wants. That's also the working theory. So walking into that meeting is either very stupid or the only play we have. Vera looked up. Which is it? The woman held her gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then, almost imperceptibly, she tilted her head. The second one, she said. If Reyes believes you'll hand over the access information voluntarily. It's the only situation in which he'll be in a room with reduced security. He doesn't trust open conflict. He trusts negotiation. He's been a political operator for 30 years. He needs the meeting to feel like his idea. Then we make it feel like his idea. It already is his idea. I mean, we make him think he won it. Vera looked at the table again. I need to understand what I'm walking into. All of it. Not the version that's been filtered for my protection. She looked at the woman directly. Your name. A pause. Sable. Vera pulled a chair up to the table. Start from the beginning. Sable looked at her for one more moment, assessing, recalibrating, and then she sat down and began. Picture that emerged over the next 40 minutes was larger than anything Vereza had assembled from 8 years of proximity and carefully managed ignorance. Bridgeway Capital Solutions had been the public face of a financial network that threaded through 14 shell corporations across 6 jurisdictions. The network moved money, not drug money, not arms money, though it had served both at various points, primarily influence money, payments to officials, payments to judges, the quiet funding of political campaigns, regulatory decisions, land rights, contract awards. It was the kind of operation that didn't need to be violent because it owned enough of the infrastructure that violence was rarely required. Her father had not built it. He had designed its architecture, the specific layering of accounts that made it untraceable, the distribution system that meant no single node held enough information to expose the whole. He was a structural mathematician by training, which was not something she had known about him. She had known him as a man who wore flannel shirts and kept a garden, and occasionally disappeared for business trips he never explained. She had been a child, and then a teenager, and she had processed her father the way children and teenagers do, as weather, as permanent fixture, the person who was there and then was not. He had faked his death, Sable told her, because someone inside the network had identified him as a potential informant, a threat, not a target they'd believed he might go to authorities voluntarily. So they'd given him a choice: disappear and be protected, or be identified as the architect of everything and spend his remaining years in a federal prison. He had chosen disappearance. He had, in choosing it, left his 19-year-old daughter to bury an empty grief. Vera sat with that. She had learned, in this particular day, how to let devastating things settle without allowing them to knock her over. It was a skill she had not known she was building. She suspected it was the only useful thing the last 8 years had actually given her. "Does he know about me?" she said. "My father. Does he know about the marriage? About today?" Sable's expression was careful. "We believe so." "Does he know I have the access key?" "We don't know what he knows." "Connected to Reyes." A pause that was half a second too long. "We're looking into that." Which meant yes. Which meant her father was not simply a man in hiding. He was still, somehow, part of this. Still connected to the network he'd designed. Or to the man who was now trying to use it as leverage against Dante and anyone associated with him. Vera's father had arranged her signature on those documents, had placed her at Bridgeway deliberately, had tied her to this network with a connection she couldn't see, at 19, while she was thinking about lunch, and had then disappeared from her life and let her grieve him for 20 years while he stayed adjacent to the thing he'd built. The warehouse door opened. Dante came in. He was walking under his own power, which was the first thing she checked. His jacket was gone. Someone had used it to wrap something. She could see the dark on his left forearm before he crossed to the table, and she could see it was bandaged underneath. His face was composed, but the composure was different now, not the locked, safe expression. Something thinner, something that had been stressed. He looked at Vera across the table. She looked back at him. "You're briefed," he said. It wasn't a question. "Reyes wants a meet in 3 hours and 40 minutes, she said. "I'm going." "No, yes, Vera, sit down," she said. "You're bleeding through that bandage." He looked at his arm as if he'd forgotten about it, which she suspected he actually had. He sat down, not because she told him to. She understood he sat down, because his body was making the argument his composure wouldn't. "Can't walk into that room," he said. "I'm the only person who can walk into that room. You said so yourself in that passage. If I have the access key, I have leverage. Reyes won't destroy what he needs. He'll take it from you, and then he won't get it." She held his gaze. "Because I'm not going to give it to him." "Then why go?" "Because while Reyes is looking at me, across a table at the Garland Hotel, he's not looking at whatever else is happening." She glanced at Sable, who had gone very still, with the particular stillness of someone following a chain of reasoning they hadn't heard before and wanted to hear completed. "What would it take," Vera said to her, "to pull the evidence archive while someone has Reyes's attention for 30 minutes? The room was quiet enough that she could hear the traffic from the street outside. Sable looked at the documents on the table, then at Vera, then at Dante, who was looking at Vera with an expression she had never in 8 years of marriage seen on his face. "The access key," Sable said slowly, "is only part of the sequence. To actually pull the archive, you'd need the node address, the key, and physical access to a terminal that's currently in Reyes's own building." "Which building?" "The administrative offices he runs through a consulting firm. 43rd floor, Harmon Tower." Vera looked at Dante. "You have people who can get into that building." "Getting in is not the problem," he said. "Getting in with a laptop and 20 uninterrupted minutes is a different." "What if Reyes is at the Garland Hotel?" Silence. "He controls the building," Dante said carefully. "Even if he's not in it, he controls it because people follow his orders." "How many of those people," Vera said, "are actually loyal to him versus loyal to whoever pays their salary?" Holt, from the far wall, made a sound that was almost nothing. Vera turned to look at him. "About 40%, Holt said. "The rest are contracted." "Contracted through the network." "Through the network, yes." "Which means," Vera said, "that if the archive is pulled and the network's accounts are exposed while Reyes is sitting at a hotel table talking to me, those contracted people lose their employer before they receive any order about what to do with whoever's on the 43rd floor." The warehouse was very quiet. Dante looked at her for a long moment. You could see him doing the math, the specific, fast, cold calculation. She'd watched him apply to 100 rooms without ever understanding what it looked like from the inside. Now she was part of it, and she found she did not mind. She found she was better at this than she'd been allowed to discover. It's a good plan, Sable said. She said it quietly, to no one in particular. It's her plan, Dante said. He was still looking at Vera. It has a gap, Vera said. Someone has to be in Harmon Tower to run the sequence. Physically, with the right equipment and the node address. She looked at Sable. That's you, I assume. That would be me, Sable said. And someone has to get me into the Garland. I'll get you in, Holt said. He said it before Dante could object, and the speed of it closed the objection off. Then we have 2 hours and 50 minutes to prepare. Vera pulled the nearest laptop toward her. I need to know everything about how Reyes runs a meeting, his security setup, his tells, how long he typically spends on opening positioning before getting to terms. She looked at Sable. You have this. I have most of it. Then let's start. Dante had not moved from his chair. She could feel him watching her, not with the locked safe expression, not with the composure she'd spent 8 years learning to read, with something older than any of that. Something that looked, if she let herself name it, like a man watching a person he'd spent years trying to protect figure out that she never needed protecting in the first place. She didn't look at him. She opened the first document Sable slid toward her. There was too much to do. But in the corner of her vision, she caught the moment Sable leaned toward Dante and said something too low for Vera to hear. And the moment Dante's expression shifted, the thin composure dropping entirely. Just for a second, and what replaced it was something she had never seen on his face in 8 years of marriage. It looked like relief. She filed it away and kept reading. 40 minutes later, when they were deep in the logistics, and Holt was running scenarios and Sable was confirming node architecture from memory, Pryor came back from a perimeter check and pulled Holt aside. The conversation was brief. Holt's face did the tightening thing she'd learned to watch. Came to her, not Dante. That by itself told her something. We have a problem, he said low. She looked up from the documents. The traitor, Holt said. We've narrowed it. It's one of 3 people in this building, right now. She looked at him steadily. Which 3? He said the names. She knew one of them, Pryor, who'd delivered the message about the meet, who'd been at the courthouse that morning, who'd come through the door before Dante, and given her the look he wasn't supposed to give her. The other 2 were men she'd seen at the windows, men she hadn't looked at long enough to remember. They can't know we've narrowed it, she said. No. Then we proceed. We use what they know. She met Holt's eyes. Let the wrong information move through all 3 of them. Different details. See which one reaches Reyes before the meeting. Holt absorbed this. That's standard, she said. Dante does it. I've watched him do it. You run misinformation through each channel and see which version surfaces on the other side. Holt looked at her for a moment. You've been paying attention for a long time. No one thought I was worth watching, she said. Yes. He nodded, moved back to the room. She watched him position the next conversation, the careful staging of it, the deliberate leak. She watched one of the 3 men move toward the far corner of the warehouse, where the phone signal was slightly better, take out a device she wasn't supposed to see, and make a contact that lasted 45 seconds. She watched. She noted the face. She said nothing. Across the warehouse, Dante had risen from his chair and was talking to 2 of his men rebuilding. Planning, his voice low and his posture straighter than it had been when he came through the door. The bandage on his arm was dark at the edges now, and he had not asked anyone to look at it, and no one had offered. She was going to walk into a hotel meeting room in just over 2 hours and sit across a table from a man who had been planning to destroy her life since before she knew his name. She looked at the string of characters in her memory. 11 characters. Page 41. Her own signature at the bottom of a document she'd signed without reading, in an office she'd been placed in by a father who hadn't died, for reasons she was still only beginning to understand. Plan was good. The plan had gaps. Every plan had gaps. She thought about Dante saying this time, "You choose," except he hadn't said that yet, she realized. That was something from a future she couldn't see. What he had said in that concrete room under the compromised estate was, "I'm sorry." For all of it. She wasn't ready to answer that yet. She didn't know if she ever would be. But she knew what she was doing in the next 2 hours, and she knew why, and, for the first time in 8 years, that knowledge belonged entirely to her. Turned back to the documents. The man in the corner with the phone was named Tesler. She filed that away, while Holt pretended not to watch him, and she pretended not to watch either of them. 2 hours and 11 minutes to the meeting. She spent the first 40 of those minutes absorbing everything Sable had built on Reyes, not summaries, the actual files, the raw material. The consulting firm he ran out of Harmon Tower was called Meridian Advisory Group, which was the kind of name that was designed to produce no reaction whatsoever, and it had been operating for 11 years as a legitimate business strategy outfit with a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies and a regional hospital network. Clean on the surface, structured like everything in the Bridgeway architecture, to distribute risk invisibly. Reyes himself was 61. Born in Barranquilla, educated in Miami, made his first significant money in commercial real estate in the early 90s before someone in the network identified him as a man both the intelligence and the moral flexibility to become useful. He did not have a criminal record. He had never been indicted, investigated, or publicly named in connection with anything. He was photographed at charity dinners. He served on a hospital board. He owned a beautiful wife and 2 adult children who lived in different cities, and, Vera suspected, knew less about their father than she'd known about hers. He ran his meetings from a specific configuration. He always positioned himself with his back to the window light in the other person's eyes, his own face in shadow. He kept 2 associates in the room during negotiations, never more. They sat flanking him, slightly behind. He did not raise his voice. In 30 years of this work, according to everything Sable had compiled, he had never once raised his voice. That told her more than the physical details did. A man who never raised his voice was a man who had never needed to. The room already knew he was the most dangerous person in it. She needed him to underestimate her. She needed to underestimate her. She needed him to think she was exactly what she looked like, a frightened woman out of her depth, willing to negotiate because she had no other option. She needed him to believe he'd already won. The thing about 8 years of being underestimated, she thought, was that it turned out to be excellent preparation. Sable came to stand beside her at the table. 40 minutes, she said. Vera nodded. She was pulling on the jacket Holt had produced, dark, fitted, anonymous. Her own jacket was back in the estate somewhere, probably in a room that was currently under Reyes's people. She did not let herself think about that. Tesler made 2 calls, Sable said, very quietly. The misinformation we seeded through him was the Garland Hotel's side entrance timing. He passed the exact details, so they'll be covering the side entrance. Heavily. Sable paused. We go through the parking structure. In Harmon Tower? I leave in 15 minutes. Independent vehicle, separate route. Sable looked at her directly. The node sequence takes 22 minutes once I'm at the terminal. If I have a problem, I'll signal through Holt's secondary channel. And if you can't get to the terminal, a beat. Then the meeting ends and you leave, and we try something else. Vera looked at her. Is there a something else? Sable held her gaze. Not a good one. All right. Vera straightened the jacket. Where's Dante? He was near the rear of the warehouse, talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, new arrivals. From a second location, she assumed. Brought in for tonight. He had changed his jacket. The bandage on his arm was fresh. Someone had finally made him deal with it. She went to him. 2 men withdrew without being asked. Tesler, she said. I know. Holt told me. He's still in the building. He won't be in the next 10 minutes. Dante said it without heat. Clinical. The way he applied force to problems when emotion would cost him accuracy. She looked at him. His color was better than it had been when he came through the door, but his eyes were doing something. She recognized the focused intensity of a man, operating past his comfortable capacity. He'd been shot, or near to it, and he was running on the particular fuel that came from knowing you didn't have the option of stopping. I need to ask you something, she said. Reyes. Before tonight, before all of this, she watched his face carefully. Did you know he was the one who had my father pushed out? Who gave him the choice between disappearing and prosecution? Dante's jaw moved. I suspected when. About 2 years into the marriage. Counted the arithmetic. 6 years ago. 6 years of knowing, or nearly knowing, that the man who'd arranged her grief and her signature and her entire entanglement in this world was the same man currently sending vehicles to collect her. 6 years of that knowledge sitting behind the locked, safe expression while she slept beside him. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes." Not an explanation. "Yes, yes," he said again. His voice had something raw in it. Not performance, she knew, his performances. This was the sound of a man who had made a calculation he'd believed was right and had been wrong for long enough that the wrongness had become permanent. She looked at him for a moment. Just looked. Then she turned and found Holt. "Let's go," she said. The Garland Hotel was 18 blocks north, and they took the route through the parking structure attached to the adjacent office building, moving through the lower level with 2 vehicles and no headlights until Holt found the service elevator that connected to the hotel's lower corridor. The hotel didn't know they were coming. The hotel didn't know they were coming. That was by design. A reservation had been made in a name that meant nothing to anyone. A suite on the 18th floor, booked that afternoon, through a third-party account, gave them presence in the building without Cranston, without flagging anything to Reyes's people, who would be monitoring the guest registry. 22nd floor. The elevator doors opened onto a carpeted hallway that smelled like every expensive hotel hallway, climate-controlled, neutral, the particular absence of smell that cost a great deal of money to achieve. 2 of Holt's men had come up ahead of them and were already positioned, one near the stairwell door, one near the elevator bank, looking like guests. Neither acknowledged her. Room 2214. The reservation for the meeting was under Meridian Advisory Group. Vera could see the door from where she stood. Holt touched her arm. 2 minutes. Sable needs 2 more minutes to be in position at Harmon Tower. She stood in the hallway and waited. She was aware of her own heartbeat with unusual clarity, not racing, just present. She could feel the 11-character string in her memory, like something physical. She thought about page 41. She thought about an office in a mid-rise building, and a Tuesday afternoon, and a job she'd taken, because she needed to cover 3 months of rent. Her phone, a clean phone, Holt had given her, buzzed once. Sable's signal. In position, Vera walked to the door and knocked. The man who opened it was not Reyes. He was security large, suited, the blank attentiveness of someone who had been hired for intimidation value, as much as function. He looked at her, looked past her at Holt, and then stepped aside. The room was a suite. The sitting area had been reconfigured chairs and a low table arranged for a conversation, not a social gathering. The lights had been adjusted to exactly what Sable's file had predicted. Window behind the main chair, direct light on the guest seating. The room felt like a stage set, which it was. Reyes was already seated. He was smaller than she'd expected, which was probably deliberate. Men who needed rooms to fear them often made themselves compact in person, so the fear arrived before the explanation did. He had silver hair cut short, a suit that was expensive without being demonstrative, and eyes that moved to her immediately and stayed there with a specific quality of attention she recognized. He was taking inventory, not of her as a person, of her as a problem to be measured. "Miss Calloway," he said. His accent was nearly absent, smoothed by decades of deliberate cultivation. "Please sit down." She sat. The 2 associates were where Sable had predicted, flanking, slightly behind. One had his hands in his lap. The other had his hands on the table, clocked them and moved on. "You came alone," Reyes said. He glanced once at the door, where Holt had remained outside. "Relatively. Mr. Holt doesn't come into rooms," she said. "He prefers to manage exits." Something very small shifted in Reyes's expression. Not amusement recalibration. She'd surprised him by knowing Holt's name, which meant his intelligence on the warehouse hadn't included the personnel roster. "Good. I'll be direct," she said, before he could take the room back. "You want the access sequence. I have it. You believe that once you have it, you can locate and destroy the archive and remove yourself from any exposure. In exchange, you're prepared to stand down from whatever you have currently aimed at me and separately at Dante Veyron." Reyes let a beat pass. "That's a reasonable summary. It's missing the part where you plan to remove me afterward, but we can return to that." Another recalibration, slightly larger this time. "You're more prepared than I expected. People generally are, when they've had time. You've had less than a day." "I've had 8 years," she said. "I just wasn't allowed to use most of them." The associate with his hands on the table shifted slightly. Reyes stilled him with nothing, not a gesture, not a word, just the quality of his stillness communicating that the shift was not necessary. The sequence, Reyes said. Tell me what you need in exchange. Safe passage. For me and for Dante. The standing order on us pulled tonight, with verification. Dante Veyron is not part of this negotiation. I've just made him part of it. Ms. Calloway. His voice stayed exactly where it had been, no rise, no sharpening. The voice of a man who had never needed volume. Dante Veyron's situation is separate from yours, and has been since this morning. You are divorced. Your legal connection to him is terminated. Whatever you may feel about that, it does not create an obligation for me to. The archive contains your communications with my father, Vera said. The room changed. Not dramatically. Nothing that anyone watching from the outside would have named as dramatic. But she saw it, the single stillness that moved through Reyes, like a current, the infinitesimal adjustment of his posture, the way his eyes stopped moving and fixed. Your father, he said, has been out of contact with this organization for 20 years, yes, since you gave him the choice. She kept her voice level. She had practiced level for 8 years, and she was very good at it. Disappear or be prosecuted. He chose to disappear. You let him, because he was more useful alive and quiet than dead, and investigated. The communications from before he disappeared, those are in the archive. His design documents, his correspondence with you specifically, the architecture of the entire network, in his handwriting and yours. Reyes was very still. So you don't just want the access sequence, she said. You need it. Tonight. Because something has changed that moved your timetable, and whatever that change is, you don't have time to find another way to the archive. I was reading him. Reading the tells Sable had described, across years of documented behavior. The way his right hand, currently resting on the table, had moved 2 millimeters toward the edge. Particular quality of his stillness, which was no longer the stillness of a man in control, but the stillness of a man managing exposure. She had 14 minutes. 14 minutes for Sable to complete the sequence. Keep him talking. Keep him convinced he's winning. You're right, she said, changing course so smoothly she saw him blink. I'm scared. I've been scared all day, and I've been pretending I'm not, and I'm not as good at that as I thought I was. She let the tension in her shoulders surface. Slightly not a collapse, just a letting go, the thing that read as a person coming off their prepared position. I don't want to be in this room. I don't want any of this. Signs a piece of paper 9 years ago for $22 an hour, and I have spent today being shot at in a concrete passage because of it. Reyes's right hand settled back toward the center of the table. Good. What I want, she said, is out. Completely. With enough safety to rebuild. She let her voice drop slightly. Dante is already out. Whatever is left of his organization after today isn't capable of protecting me long term, and I know that. So I'm not here for him. I'm here for me. That is, Reyes said slowly, a more honest conversation. I'm tired of dishonest ones. He studied her for a long moment. The associates stayed exactly where they were. The room was very quiet. Then Reyes said, give me the sequence, and I'll have the order pulled within the hour. You'll have verified confirmation. A car takes you wherever you choose to go tonight, and you're no longer a concern of mine. And Dante Veyron is not your concern anymore. She held his gaze. Let the silence sit for exactly as long as a woman who was scared and exhausted and making a painful decision would let it sit. Then her phone buzzed. Not Sable's signal, the wrong pattern. Felt it against her palm, and the pattern was wrong, and she kept her face exactly where it was. 2 buzzes, then 1. Wrong, that was the abort signal. She did not move. She did not blink. She sat in the chair in front of Reyes and absorbed the information that something had gone wrong at Harmon Tower, and she had no idea what, and she could not ask, and she could not leave, and she could not show any of this on her face. 11 minutes. Sable needed 11 more minutes, or had needed them, before something had gone wrong. The sequence, Reyes said. She was out of time to think about Harmon Tower. She was out of time to think about anything except the next sentence. I need the pull order confirmed first, she said, in writing, from whoever you report to. Something shifted in the room. Not Reyes, the associates. Both of them. In a micro-adjustment she caught only because she was watching for exactly this category of signal. The one with his hands on the table moved both hands below the table. The one with his hands in his lap squared his shoulders. Reyes looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not the assessment, not the recalibration. Something older and less managed. In writing, he said. From whoever I report to. He said it the way you repeat something, back when you want the person to hear what they just said. When you want them to understand, they have made an error. Vera understood immediately that she had made an error, not the words themselves the implication. She'd phrased it to suggest she knew there was someone above Reyes, which there was. She'd inferred it from ZIS files, from the architecture of a network too large to have only one center. But she'd shown she knew, and she'd shown it too clearly, which told him she'd been briefed, which told him she knew more than a frightened ex-wife negotiating for her safety would know. The door opened, not Holtzside the interior door of the suite, connecting to an adjacent room, and the man who came through it was not one of Reyes's associates. Vera had never seen his face in person. She had seen it once, in a photograph that was 20 years old, carried in the pocket of the grief she'd built around a lie. Her father walked into the room and sat down beside Reyes, as if he'd been in the adjacent room the entire time. Because he had been. Because he had been in this hotel for hours before she arrived, listening, positioned, waiting. He looked at her. His hair was white now, what remained of it. He had aged the way men aged when they lived without stress, not badly, just differently. He looked like the man she remembered and didn't, the way that all people look like the photographs you have of them, and also nothing like them at all. Vera, he said. She could not speak. She had believed, in the warehouse, in the abstract briefing, that she had processed this. She had been wrong. There was no processing a father you had buried at 19, walking into a room and saying your name. Sit back, he said gently. You don't need to give him anything. She looked at Reyes. Reyes had settled in his chair with the expression of a man who has revealed his strongest card and is waiting to see the damage. Your father has been working with me for the past 3 years, Reyes said. Not against you. He's been working to protect you. The account architecture he designed has a fail-safe termination sequence that destroys the archive remotely. The access sequence you've memorized doesn't retrieve the evidence. Triggers the deletion. The room tilted. She looked at her father. True. His expression was careful. The careful expression of a man managing a very delicate thing. More complicated than is it true. The sequence triggers the deletion. Yes. But. So Dante's people Sable if they'd run the sequence at Harmon Tower. The archive would have been destroyed. Yes. Her father leaned forward slightly. That's the point, Vera. That's what Dante wanted. Not exposure destruction. The evidence that archive contains would destroy a great many people. Yes, but it would also expose him, she said. Silence. The archive contains his records too, she said. She heard her own voice, from somewhere outside herself, flat, stripped of everything, the voice of someone who has passed through too many revelations in a single day to respond to any of them with appropriate volume. The evidence doesn't just expose the network. It exposes Dante's role in it, and he wanted it destroyed. That's what the divorce was actually for, not to protect me from Reyes. To position himself, to destroy the evidence before any of it could be used against him. Her father's face told her she was right. Reyes's face told her she was right. Phone in her hand buzzed again. Different pattern. Holt from the hallway, asking for a status signal. She did not respond to it. The abort signal, she said slowly. 20 minutes ago, the wrong pattern. It wasn't from Sable aborting at Harmon Tower. It was a signal Dante had built into the communication protocol, his own channel, his own abort. Triggered the moment. Sable reached the terminal, and the sequence became live. He'd shut it down before the deletion could run. Because he hadn't wanted the archive destroyed after all. Because something had changed. Or because she had been wrong, from the beginning, about what Dante actually wanted. Her father was watching her process this. Her father was watching her process this with an expression she hadn't seen since childhood. It was his patient expression, the face he made when he was letting her work through something difficult at her own pace. Face he had worn, sitting at the kitchen table while she struggled with math she was convinced she couldn't do. He set you up, her father said, quietly. Not me, not Reyes. Dante gave you a sequence he knew would delete the archive, and he sent you into this room to run a meeting he knew would fail, because the real plan— He stopped. The real plan isn't here. Where is it? She said. Her father looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at Vera. The real plan, Reyes said, is wherever Dante Veyron is right now, which is not, I suspect, the warehouse on Kendrick Street. The carpet under Vera's chair was a dark burgundy pattern, the kind of pattern that was designed to show no stains. She stared at it. For 2 seconds, the 2 seconds it took for the full shape of the thing to assemble itself in her mind, piece by piece, with the horrible clarity of something that had been true all along. She stood up. Where is he going? She said. She said it to her father, not Reyes, because her father was the one who had designed the architecture, and therefore the one who knew where the exits were. Her voice came out hard, and she let it. Dun sang steady. She was done being the woman in the room, who kept her voice level while other people moved the pieces around her. He's going somewhere that requires me to be sitting in this room. Somewhere that requires Sable to be at Harmon Tower and Holt to be in this hallway, and every person in his organization to be positioned where they are right now. He needed us placed, all of us. She looked at her father. The only place that leaves unguarded is wherever he actually wanted to go. Her father's jaw tightened, and in the tightening, she saw the flicker of something that was not calculation but fear. Specific fear of a man who has been managing a situation and has just realized that the situation has developed a dimension he had not accounted for. Lucian, her father said. The name hit the room like something dropped from a height. Reyes actually moved. The first involuntary physical reaction she'd seen from him, his hand going to the phone in his jacket before he stopped himself. Lucian Veyron, her father said. He looked at Reyes with something that was past anxiety, into the specific register of a man who has just understood that the threat he's been managing from one direction has been in the room behind him the entire time. Dante isn't running from us. He's running toward his brother. His brother is in custody, Reyes said. Sharp, controlled, but under it something that was very close to panic. He was picked up 2 months ago on the federal warrant. He was released, Vera said. She said it because she knew it was true the moment her father said the name. She went because of the recording Holt had referenced in the estate, a recording she hadn't heard, information she'd been told about and filed away. Dante's voice months earlier saying his greatest fear was losing her. And somewhere in that recording, she now understood the name Lucian, not as a threat from outside, as a reason. Dante's brother is the person who had Carver killed, she said. Not Reyes's traitor, not Tesler. Tesler was a decoy someone Dante knew about and allowed to stay because having a known leak is useful. The actual infiltration of the estate, the person who knew Carver's rotation, the person who opened those gates. She looked at Reyes. That was Lucian's people. And Dante knew. If he knew Reyes started, he used it. He used all of it. He used me coming here, used Sable going to Harmon Tower, used Holt standing in this hallway, all of it, to give himself cover to go somewhere else. She picked up her clean phone. While every person connected to him is accounted for and monitored, he's completely invisible. Called Holt. He picked up on the first ring. Status. Where did Dante go? She said. After we left the warehouse. Who did he leave with? A pause. Longer than it should have been. He was at the warehouse when we departed. I had 2 men on him. Call them. Silence on the line. She heard Holt making a secondary call, the brief exchange, and then the silence that was a different kind of silence. The 2 men aren't responding, Holt said. Vera looked at her father across the table. She looked at Reyes. She looked at the room she'd walked into, believing she was the one running the play. Lucian Veyron has been out of federal custody, she said. Dante knew. He's been moving toward his brother this entire day, while everyone who might stop him was busy managing me. She set the phone down, which means the thing Dante actually wants isn't the archive destroyed. It isn't Reyes neutralized. It isn't me safe. She breathed in once, controlled. He wants Lucian. Lucian has leverage, her father said very quietly. If Dante moves against him, without support, without positioning, Lucian's people will release everything. Every record, every name, including Dante's. I know, including yours. The Bridgeway connection isn't just evidence against the network. It's evidence against you as a signatory. They can make it look. I know. She looked at him steadily, the father she had grieved. The man sitting beside the most dangerous person she'd ever been in a room with, having spent 20 years, doing the calculation of his own survival. She looked at him and felt the specific anger of a daughter and set it down, the way you set down something too heavy to carry into a fight. Where is Lucien? Her father looked at her for a long moment. She watched him decide. She watched him do the things she'd learned from Dante: calculate, weigh, position. And then she watched him stop calculating and just look at her the way he used to at the kitchen table, with the patient expression. The old Veyron warehouse, he said. Port District. Dante's known since this morning. She picked up the phone and told Holt. Then she looked at Reyes, who was watching her with the expression of a man who had arrived at this meeting certain of his position and was now uncertain of the floor. Whatever you had planned for tonight, she said, you need to let it go. Because if Dante reaches Lucien without support and this goes wrong, the archive goes public and you are on page 1. She held his gaze. Which means, for the next 3 hours, you need me to succeed more than you need anything else. Reyes sat very still. Drive me to the Port District, she said. And because he had no better option left, he did. Reyes's car was a black sedan, unmarked, driven by a man who did not speak and did not look in the rearview mirror. Vera sat in the back beside her father, with Reyes on the other side of him, and the city moved past the winds away. Cities move at night. When you are traveling towards something, you cannot stop. Holt was 3 minutes behind them in a separate vehicle. He'd confirmed it on the phone without asking why she was in Reyes's car, which told her he'd already processed the shift in the situation and adapted, which was why Dante had kept him. She was still working through the tense on Dante. Tell me about Lucien, she said. She said it to her father, not to Reyes, because Reyes's information about Lucien was operational and her father's was structural, and right now she needed structure. Her father looked at his hands for a moment. They were older hands than she remembered. Knuckled, slightly spotted the hands of a man who had been alive for 20 years longer than she'd believed. Lucien is 7 years younger than Dante. He came into the organization differently, not inherited, not built, recruited. Dante brought him in at 23 because he trusted him and because Lucien is, in certain technical regards, exceptionally capable. He paused. He's also the kind of person who experiences his loyalty as a temporary state. When did he turn? 3 years ago. Slowly, then fast. The usual pattern. Her father glanced at Reyes without turning his head, fully a careful, practiced glance. He made contact with certain parties who were interested in the Veyron organization's infrastructure, but not in Dante's continued involvement with it. He was selling access to the organization. To you, she said to Reyes. Reyes looked out the window, among others, and Dante found out. Dante found out 8 months ago, her father said. He didn't move immediately. He spent those 8 months positioning, building a case, making sure that when he moved against Lucien, it would be complete not just removal but exposure, so no one in the network could attempt to reinstall him. The archive, Vera said. The archive contains Lucien's communications, everything he passed to Reyes and the others. Complete documentation of the betrayal. Her father looked at her directly. That's what Dante actually wanted it for. Not to protect himself, not to destroy it, to use it against Lucien. She turned this over. All day the divorce, the estate, the warehouse, the hotel, and underneath all of it, running on a separate track, Dante's actual objective. Not her protection, not his own, his brother. He lied to me, she said, about the sequence, about what it would do. He gave you a sequence that would have deleted the archive. Yes. He didn't tell you the deletion clause. Her father's voice was careful. I don't know whether that was protection or strategy. It was both, Vera said. It's always both with him. The port district arrived the way port districts do gradually, the city's texture changing, the buildings getting lower and more utilitarian, the smell of the water asserting itself through the car's climate control. Reyes's driver slowed without being told to, navigating by familiarity through unmarked turns. The Veyron warehouse was a structure she'd driven past once, years ago, without knowing what it was. It looked like every other building in the port district, corrugated metal, loading dock, the particular absence of signage that industrial buildings wear like camouflage. But it was large, larger than it looked from the approach, and it sat on a spit of land where the road dead-ended at the water, which meant there were exactly 3 ways in, and the water covered the 4th. Reyes's driver killed the lights 2 blocks out. They sat. Vera looked at the building. She counted what she could see. 4 vehicles parked along the south side, lights off, occupied or recently occupied, based on the heat shimmer above one of the hoods. Movement near the loading dock, intermittent. The kind of movement that was either patrol or people waiting. "How many does Lucian have?" she said. "He had access to contract security through the network," Reyes said. 15, 20 people. Had some will have defected when word spread of tonight's situation. A pause. Some won't. Holt's vehicle rolled to a stop behind them. She heard the door open, heard his footsteps, and then he was at her window. She opened it. "Dante's inside," Holt said. He had a cut on his forehead that hadn't been there at the warehouse, and his jacket was gone. She didn't ask. "My 2 men who went quiet, one of them checked in." Dante walked out of the warehouse with 4 people she didn't recognize, and a vehicle she'd never seen before. He was moving fast, and he didn't tell anyone where he was going. "Because he knew someone would try to stop him," Vera said. "Because he knew I would try to stop him," Holtz said. There was something in his voice she'd never heard from him, not anger, not frustration. Particular sound of a man who has been loyal to someone for a long time and has just been excluded from the thing that matters most. He's been planning to go at Lucian directly since this morning. Everything else was to create the window, including me. Holt looked at her without flinching. "Yes." Vera opened the car door and got out. The night air was cold and salt-heavy, the water close enough to hear. She looked at the warehouse. Thought about Dante somewhere inside that building, with 4 people she didn't know, going after a brother who had spent 3 years selling him to his enemies. And she thought about the archive, the actual archive, not the deletion sequence. The evidence that Lucian's betrayal had generated, sitting in a distributed network that Sable had been positioned to pull, and hadn't because Dante had aborted the sequence. She looked at Holt. "Does Sable still have access to the terminal at Harmon Tower?" "She's holding position." She went dark when the abort came through. "Can she run the pull sequence? The actual extraction, not the deletion." Holt's eyes moved. "I'd need to give her a different access string." "I know." Vera looked at her father, who had gotten out of the car and was standing beside it with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked, she thought, very much like a man who had been waiting a long time for something to be required of him. "The real sequence," she said to him. "The extraction sequence, not the termination. You built both. You built the failsafe, and you built the original function." She held his gaze. "Give it to me." Her father was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Reyes, behind him, took a half step forward and then stopped, as if he'd reconsidered the value of intervening. "If the extraction runs," her father said carefully, "the records go to every destination the archive was designed to reach. Federal authorities, journalists, rival networks. Everyone on that list receives everything simultaneously. There is no controlling who sees what." "I know." "Including Dante's records." "I know. Including mine." She looked at him, at the white hair and the old hands and the patient expression he'd worn at a kitchen table while she was 19 and didn't know that her grief was a constructed thing, a cage someone had built to keep her manageable and close. She looked at him and she said, "Yes, including yours." Her father breathed in through his nose, out slowly. Then he said the sequence. Says it was longer than the termination string. 19 characters, differently structured. And she said it beside the termination string in her memory and confirmed she could hold both. She could. She gave it to Holt. He got on his radio to Sable. Then she looked at the warehouse. "I'm going in," she said. Vera, her father started. "Dante went in alone because he didn't want anyone to stop him," she said. "That's not the same as not needing anyone." She looked at Holt. "You have people 6 outside, 2 inside. From a secondary entry point, they went in ahead of us by 12 minutes. Then let's not waste their 12 minutes." Holt looked at her for 1 second. Then he reached into the back of his vehicle and came out with a vest, tactical, dark, the kind of thing she'd seen on his people all day, but never expected to be handed directly. Put it on without comment. Her hands were steady. She was aware of her heartbeat with that same unusual clarity from the hotel. the same quality of presence, and she decided that it was not fear, but something adjacent to it, something that felt like the body understanding the stakes and rising to meet them. They went in through the north loading dock. The dock's door had been forced recent, the lock mechanism still bent outward. Holt's people had come through here. She stepped inside and the smell of the warehouse hit her. Metal, salt, oil, and the particular cold of large spaces that don't retain heat. Emergency lighting along the ceiling low, orange gave the space the quality of a thing seen underwater. The warehouse floor was enormous. Stacked shipping containers along the east wall, old equipment under tarps. The ghost of whatever legitimate operation this building had once been. And in the center of the floor, arranged in a space that had been deliberately cleared, a confrontation already in progress. She saw Dante first. He was standing 30 feet from a man she'd never seen in person, but recognized from a photograph. Sable had shown her in the warehouse Lucian Veyron, younger than his brother by 7 years, which put him in his early 40s. He was built differently from Dante, leaner, less physically imposing, the kind of person who'd learned young that physical intimidation wasn't his strength, and had developed other tools instead. He had Dante's coloring, but not Dante's bearing, and the difference was in the posture. Dante stood like someone used to rooms centering on him. Lucian stood like someone used to watching the room from the edge of it. Between them, and around them, the damage of a fight that had already happened. 2 of Dante's 4 people were down, one conscious and pressing his hand to his side, one not moving. Lucian had 3 men still standing, positioned, and there was a 4th behind Lucian who had an arm around a person Vera processed with a delay that felt physical. Sable. Sable was in the warehouse. Sable, who was supposed to be holding position at a terminal on the 43rd floor of Harmon Tower, was here, in this building, with a man's arm across her throat and her hands behind her back. Vera's mind ran the sequence fast. Sable had not aborted at Harmon Tower because of Dante's signal. She'd aborted because she'd been taken. Lucian's people had gotten to Harmon Tower ahead of the abort and pulled her out, and the signal that had reached Vera's phone in the hotel, the wrong pattern, hadn't been Dante shutting down the sequence. It had been Lucian demonstrating that he had control of the communication channel, which meant Lucian had been inside the communication structure the entire time. Not Tesla, not a warehouse leak. Inside. She stopped moving. Holt stopped beside her. Neither of them had been seen, yet the confrontation in the center of the floor had all eyes forward, and they were in the shadow of the dock entrance. Dante was speaking. His voice carried in the warehouse acoustics, flatter and more exposed than in enclosed rooms. "Let her go," he said. Not a shout. The same flat, controlled register he used when he had already calculated the outcomes and was simply announcing the result. "She's the only reason you haven't done something you can't take back," Lucian said. His voice was different, lighter, almost conversational. The voice of a man who was enjoying the proximity of the moment. "You're not going to shoot me, Dante. You have a plan. You always have a plan. And the plan doesn't include me dead, because dead men don't confess. Your confession is already recorded," Dante said. Lucian smiled. She could see it from 40 feet away in orange emergency lighting. "That recording is on a device that is currently in this building, specifically in my jacket pocket. You want it admitted as evidence anywhere. You need it in a chain of custody that doesn't begin with you handing it to a federal agent while your own files are still classified." He tilted his head slightly. "You've run out of road, brother. I've been out of road before. Not like this." Lucian's voice dropped, not softer, but more direct, the performance peeling back slightly to something underneath it. "You married a woman you used as a structural asset, and then spent 8 years convincing yourself it was something else. You built an organization and then watched it collapse because you were protecting her instead of running it. And tonight, you walked into this building alone because you wanted this to be between us, without lawyers, without leverage, without the apparatus, because some part of you believes that if you can just get me in a room and make me understand what I did, it'll mean something." His voice was not cruel, which was somehow worse. "It doesn't mean anything. I made a business decision. You should understand that." Dante was quiet. "Where's the woman?" Lucian said. "Wife. She's supposed to be at the Garland Hotel." He glanced at the man holding Sable. Someone should have called with confirmation by now. She walked out of the Garland 40 minutes ago, the man said. Lucian's expression changed. Just slightly. Where is she? That was when Vera stepped out of the shadow. She walked into the orange light of the warehouse floor with her hands visible, and her pace even, and she felt every set of eyes in the building find her simultaneously. Lucian's men, Dante's two standing people, Sable's eyes above the arm at her throat, and Dante, who turned his head and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been surprised exactly twice in his life and is experiencing the second time. She's here, she said. The warehouse absorbed her voice. Lucian looked at her with an assessment that was faster and colder than Reyes's had been. Reyes operated from behind his control. Lucian operated from behind a decision he'd already made. Ms. Calloway, he said, you're full of surprises. I'm a librarian, she said. We're good at finding things. She was watching Sable. Sable's eyes were doing something moving, precise, directed, looking at Vera, and then down, and then at Vera again. Down. Vera tracked it. Sable's right hand, behind her back, was doing something with her fingers. A count. 3 fingers, 2, 1. Sable dropped. Not stumbled, chose to drop. Suddenly and completely, her full weight going to her knees, and the arm across her throat became an arm cutting air, and the man behind her lurched forward with the momentum, and in the half-second that he was off balance, Holt moved. The shot was controlled and single, and the man went down without taking Sable with him, and Sable was already rolling, already moving toward the nearest container stack. The warehouse erupted. Lucian's 2 standing men went for Dante. Simultaneously, the third broke toward Vera and met Holt's people coming through the North Dock entrance behind her, which became its own collision of bodies and impact sounds that she didn't watch because she was watching Dante. Dante had moved the moment Holt fired. He crossed the distance to the nearest of Lucian's men in 4 strides, and what happened in the next 8 seconds was too fast and too close to follow. Fully she caught impressions. The hard crack of something impacting metal, a man's weight hitting a container, Dante's arm coming up, and then not being there when it was reached for. Lucian ran. Not toward the exit, it's toward the east wall, toward the stacked containers, and Vera understood immediately that he wasn't running away. He was running toward something. Something he'd positioned here. She ran after him. Her body surprised her she had not known. She could move this fast in this vest on this floor. But she moved, and behind her, she heard Holt shout something she didn't process. And ahead of her, Lucian was already at the container stack, was pulling something from the top of a crate, was turning. Not a weapon, a phone. He held it up when he turned and saw her 6 feet away, and his expression was the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd seen on him, not fear, not anger, but the specific expression of a man pressing the only button he has left. The archive goes live in 40 seconds, he said. This is a dead man trigger. If I release pressure on this screen, the distribution runs. Every record, every name. He looked at her steadily, including yours, including Dante's. She stopped. Behind her, the warehouse sounds continued. She could hear the fight, hear Holt's people working, hear a sound that might have been Dante, or might have been one of Lucian's men. But in this particular corner of the building, with a container wall blocking the orange light, it was just her and Lucian and a phone screen. You'll be arrested, she said. The moment this ends and the authorities arrive, the recording in your pocket is inadmissible without a clean chain of custody. I told Dante that. It's true. He watched her. I go to a federal attorney with cooperation terms, and I walk in 3 years. You and Dante spend the rest of your lives building defenses against the evidence in that archive. She looked at the phone in his hand. His thumb was against the screen pressure. Consistent, the kind of contact that a dead man trigger read as continuous authorization. Thought about the sequence in her memory. The real one. 19 characters. She thought about Holt's radio to Sable. She thought about the last things the Sable had signaled before she'd been taken holding position, waiting, the terminal in Harmon Tower still accessible. How long has the terminal at Harmon Tower been unattended? She said. Lucian's expression moved. What? Your people pulled Sable out of that building, but pulling her out takes time. Before they pulled her, she was at the terminal, running the extraction sequence I gave her. She held his gaze. How long ago was that? She didn't run anything. She was aborted. By a signal you intercepted and replicated, Vera said. I know. But between the moment she reached the terminal and the moment your signal reached her phone, there was a window. She paused. How long was the window? Lucian's jaw tightened. His thumb was still on the screen. 40 seconds, he said. Automatic, he'd calculated it himself. She could see him calculating it, which meant he'd been calculating it since his people reported pulling Sable from the terminal. The extraction sequence takes 32 seconds to initialize, Vera said. She had no idea if that was true. She said it like it was true, which was different. And she watched Lucian's face for the thing that happened when information you've been certain about becomes uncertain. She saw it. The smallest fracture. Not enough to drop the phone, not enough to make him uncertain enough, but enough. You're lying, he said. Maybe. She took one step toward him. Or maybe the sequence initialized before your signal hit her phone, and the records are already pulling to every destination in the archive's distribution list, and your dead man trigger releases, something that's already in progress. Another step, in which case, pressing that button doesn't give you leverage. It just makes you a man standing in a warehouse with a phone in your hand while the world ends outside. Lucian looked at her. He looked at the phone. His thumb moved, not lifting, but shifting, a fractional adjustment, the involuntary physical response of a man whose certainty has just developed a crack. It was enough. Vera crossed the remaining distance, closed her hand around the phone, and pressed her own thumb over Lucian's to maintain screen contact, while she shouted not Holt's name, not Dante Sable's name, as loud as she'd ever shouted anything in her life. Lucian grabbed her wrist. His grip was hard and his other hand came up, and for 3 full seconds, it was just the two of them, and the phone between them, both thumbs on the screen. A dead man trigger held alive by 2 people pulling in opposite directions. And she thought, with the specific absurdity of extreme moments, I was a librarian, covered books in plastic wrap. I organized periodicals. Then Dante was there. She didn't see him arrive. He was simply not there. And then and he had Lucian's arm, and the grip on her wrist broke. And the phone was in her hand, alone, with her thumb on the screen, and Lucian was against the container wall with Dante's forearm across his chest and both of them breathing hard. The warehouse had gone quiet. She registered that distantly. The sounds of the fight had stopped. She looked at the phone. Her thumb was on the screen. She could feel the glass against her skin, the slight warmth of it. She looked at Dante. He was looking at her. He had a cut above his eye that was sending blood down the side of his face in a thin line, and his breathing was ragged, and his arm was across his brother's chest, and he was looking at her with the expression she hadn't been able to name in the concrete passage under the estate. She named it now. It was the expression of a man who had run every calculation and was out of calculations, and was just looking at the person in front of him. The extraction sequence, she said. Her voice was steady. Did Sable initialize it before they pulled her? Dante was quiet for a second. I don't know. You aborted. You sent the abort signal from the warehouse. I changed my mind, he said it simply. I changed my mind and sent the abort, and I don't know if it reached her before she'd initialized. Why did you change your mind? He looked at her for a long moment. Lucian was still against the wall, breathing, not fighting the calculation in his eyes, running a different set of numbers now. Because it was your plan, Dante said, and it was a better plan than mine. Vera looked at the phone in her hand. She looked at Holt, who was standing 10 feet away with 3 of his people, all of them watching her. She looked at the warehouse Lucian's men down or contained, Dante's people managing the space, Sable emerging from behind a container stack with her jacket torn and her face set in the expression of someone who has been through a significant amount and is not done yet. She looked at Sable. Did you initialize? Sable crossed the floor to her, reached into her jacket, produced a small device, a secondary phone, different from the one she'd been using, the kind of backup Vera had not known she carried. I initialized at the terminal, Sable said. 31 seconds before they pulled me. I couldn't confirm the completion, but she looked at the device. 19 seconds ago, I received a distribution confirmation from 3 of the archive's primary destination addresses. The warehouse was very quiet. It's done, Sable said. Lucian stopped breathing for a moment. She saw it the single suspended second of a man whose last option has just been confirmed closed. Vera lifted her thumb from the phone screen. Nothing happened, because there was nothing left to happen. Whatever the dead man trigger had been designed to release, it had either already distributed or become irrelevant. And in either case, the phone was just a phone now, warm from her hand, ordinary. She set it on top of the nearest crate. She looked at Lucian. He was looking at the phone. His expression had gone somewhere. She didn't have a name for past anger, past calculation, into the specific blank of a man who has been outmaneuvered so completely that the next move hasn't materialized yet. "The recording in your pocket," she said. "The one you told Dante was inadmissible." She looked at him steadily. "Give it to Holt." Lucian looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and held it out, and Holt crossed the floor and took it, and that was the sound of something ending not dramatic, not violent, just a small device changing hands in a cold warehouse by the water. Dante stepped back from his brother. He dropped his arm. He stood 2 feet away from Lucian Veyron and looked at him with an expression Vera could not read because she had never seen it on him. Before, it was the expression of a man looking at a decision that cannot be unmade and has already been made. "Don't," Lucian said. "Not a plea. Something flatter than a plea. Don't make it something it isn't." "I'm not making it anything," Dante said. "You're going to stand there and feel something about this." "Yes, it was business, I know." Dante's voice was very quiet. "That's the worst part." Holt moved toward Lucian with 2 of his people, and Lucian went with them without resistance, which was somehow more devastating to watch than resistance would have been. The resignation of a man who had made his calculation and lost, and was already moving to the next calculation. The warehouse door at the south end opened. Cold air moved through the space. Vera heard vehicles outside multiple vehicles. The kind of arrival that meant the world outside this building had been moving while they were inside it, had been receiving archive records, and setting things in motion that none of them would fully control from this point forward. She was standing in the middle of a warehouse floor in a tactical vest, with a dead man trigger phone on a crate beside her, and the man she had divorced 12 hours ago was 3 feet away with blood on his face. And somewhere outside the federal apparatus was beginning to process what the archive had just delivered to it. She looked at Dante. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything, because there was nothing yet that was equal to the moment, and they were both, in their different ways, people who had learned not to speak before they were ready. But she saw his hand move just slightly, just an inch, the smallest possible gesture in the direction of the space between them, and she saw it and did not move toward it, and did not move away from it, and let that be enough for now, because the south door was opening wider, and the cold air was coming in, and everything that happened next was going to happen whether they were ready or not. The south door opened all the way, and the first person through it was a federal agent in a dark windbreaker, with 3 letters on the back that Vera had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, were coming. Behind him came 6 more, then 4 in different jackets, then 2 men in suits who moved like people who did not need to announce what they were. The warehouse became a different kind of space immediately. Not more dangerous, less, in the specific way that the arrival of institutional authority reduces one category of danger while introducing another. Holt's people stood down without being told to, the practiced, precise standing down of people who had contingency plans for exactly this moment. Lucian was already restrained. The 2 men Holt had secured near the container wall offered no resistance. Vera stood where she was and let it happen around her. The agent in the lead mid-50s, gray at the temples, the unhurried walk of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that urgency at the arrival stage was usually theater, came directly to her, not to Dante, not to Holt. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I'm Special Agent Brandt. We've been receiving archive materials for the past 26 minutes. "I know," she said. "We're going to need to speak with you at length." "I know that too." He looked at her for a moment, the assessment of a man who had expected a different version of this woman and was recalibrating. "There are a number of materials in the archive that reference you by name, as a signatory, as a connected party." He said it carefully, not unkindly. "There's going to be a process." "I understand the process."
"You may want counsel before."
"I know what I signed," she said, 9 years ago and today. I know what I have and haven't done. I'm not going anywhere." She looked past him toward the door. "There's a man outside who has been living under a false identity for 20 years. His name was Raymond Calloway. He's been operating as. She stopped and looked at her father, who had come in from the North Dock with Holt's people and was standing near the wall, watching her with that kitchen table expression. What name have you been using? Her father looked at her. He looked at Brant. He straightened, slightly an old man, doing the particular straightening of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just decided to set it down. Martin Forsyth, he said, for the last 18 years. Vera looked back at Brant. Martin Forsyth. He has information about the Bridgeway Network's original architecture. He'll cooperate fully. She said this as a statement of fact and did not look at her father when she said it. She heard her father exhale, just once, a long, slow breath that sounded like 20 years leaving a body. Brant looked between them. He had the experienced agent's ability to let a complicated family moment exist without commenting on it. He nodded once and moved on, turning to coordinate with his people, and the warehouse began its transition from crime scene to federal operation. The careful, methodical claiming of space that law enforcement did, setting up of perimeter and chain of custody, and all the bureaucratic machinery of accountability. Vera walked to the wall near the North Dock. She put her back against the corrugated metal and closed her eyes for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. She counted them. When she opened them, Dante was standing beside her. He hadn't announced himself. He was simply there the way he'd been there at the end of the underground passage, present, without ceremony, without the apparatus that usually attended him. His face had been seen to someone had given him something for the cut above his eye, a field dressing, slightly crooked, the kind of thing applied fast by someone who wasn't a medic. His arm was worse. She could see the dark, at the bandage's edge spreading, and he was favoring it without acknowledging that he was. She looked at the bandage and then at him and said nothing about it. The archive distribution, she said. Your records are in there. Yes, everything. Most things. He was looking at the warehouse floor. The attorneys will argue about what's prosecutable and what isn't. That process takes years, and I know how to survive it. He paused. Surviving isn't the same as walking away clean. No, it isn't. I know. She looked at his profile, the cut, the dressing, the particular quality of exhaustion in the set of his jaw. You changed your mind about the abort signal because it was my plan, she said. Told me. Yes. That wasn't the only reason. He was quiet for a moment. No. Tell me the other reason. He turned to look at her. Because I spent 8 years making decisions about your life without telling you I was making them. And I was doing it again. And this time, he stopped. Jaw worked. This time, you were in the room. You weren't somewhere I'd put you for safekeeping. You were in the room, and you were making the better call. And I sent a signal that would have stopped you from making it. His voice was very flat now. The particular flatness that she'd learned was not absence of feeling, but impression of it. Too much pressed into too small a space. I reversed it. That's all. That's not all, she said. No. She looked at him for a long moment. The warehouse was full of movement now, agents and Holt's people, and the careful dismantling of a situation that had been years in the construction. Lucian was being walked toward the south door. She watched him go. He didn't look back at Dante. She had thought he might, had thought there would be some last exchange, some final version of the thing that had broken between them. But Lucian walked out without turning, and the door closed behind him, and that was all there was. Dante watched his brother leave. His face did not change. She watched his face not change and understood, in the way you understand things about people you have lived beside for years, that the not changing was costing him more than any expression would have. He said it was business, she said. He always said things like that. Even when we were kids, whenever something hurt him, he'd decide it was a transaction. Dante looked at the closed door for another moment, then away. I don't know if he believed it or if it was just easier. Does it matter? He thought about it. No, he said. I don't think it does. Brant was moving toward them across the warehouse floor. Vera watched him come and spoke quickly into the remaining time. The bookstore, she said. Dante looked at her. The money from my father's account, the network account with my signature access. Reyes told me it exists. He said it's recoverable. She looked at him steadily. Is it? Dante was quiet. How much do you know about it? Enough to ask. The account has been separately structured for years. It's not Bridgeway money. It's money that was moved to an independent holding as a contingency. Your father set it up as an exit fund. For you specifically, if the situation ever he stopped. Clean. It's been clean for 7 years. The archive records will confirm the provenance. A pause. You can access it. She had thought, when her father told her the account existed back in that underground passage, that she would feel something complex about it. About money her father had set aside for a daughter he'd abandoned to a false death, as if the money were absolution, as if the account balance could settle what the absence had cost. She found she didn't feel complex about it. She felt simply tired and practical and certain that the money's origin story was something she would work out how to live with over time, the way you worked out how to live with most things gradually, imperfectly, on your own terms. All right, she said. And that was all she said about it. Brant arrived. Mr. Veyron, he said, we need to begin. Dante looked at Vera. She looked at him. The specific look of two people with unfinished things between them who are about to be separated by the machinery of consequence. I'll be in the building, she said. He nodded and went with Brant. She stood against the wall for another minute after they walked away. Then she went to find Holt. He was near the North Dock, talking to one of Brant's agents in the careful, cooperative way that a man in his position talked to federal agents, giving what was required, volunteering nothing, keeping his face arranged in the expression of someone who understood the difference between helpful and exposed. When the agent moved away, Vera came to stand beside him. Sable, she said. She's fine. Debrief with Brant's team started 15 minutes ago. Holt looked at her sidelong. She initialized at 31 seconds. The confirmation came back clean. Everything pulled. Everything. Every record in the archive. Every destination on the list. He paused. It's a long list. She thought about what that meant in concrete and terms. The people who would receive calls tomorrow. The attorneys who would be contacted tonight. The careers and operations and carefully constructed lives that were currently in the process of becoming past tense. The men in Reyes's conference rooms. The officials in their offices with framed photographs on their desks. The judges who had signed decisions that no longer read the way they were supposed to read. Quiet administrative machinery of corruption. Stopping. Not cleanly. Nothing this size stopped cleanly. It would be years of litigation and negotiation and legal maneuvering, and some of it would survive in forms that weren't quite accountability and weren't quite justice. She understood that, but the machinery was stopping, and stopping was different from running, and she would take different. Reyes, she said, cooperating. Holt said it without inflection. He made his calculation fast. He was on the phone with a federal attorney before the archive hit the third distribution point. He'll walk in 3 years, she said. It was what Lucien had said, except Lucien had said it about himself, and now it applied to Reyes instead, which was the specific irony of watching men like these calculate their way through consequences. Probably less, Holt said. She accepted that. And my father. Holt was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. And the honesty of it, the first time she could remember Holt saying he didn't know something, made her look at him directly. He met her eyes. He designed the architecture. He'll have information no one else has. What the prosecutors do with that depends on what he gives them and whether they decide his cooperation is worth the trade. He paused. He seemed like he was going to give them everything. He was, she said. She thought about her father standing in the hotel room. When she'd walked in, the calculated theater of the reveal, and then she thought about his face in the car on the way to the Port District when she'd asked him for the real sequence. The pause, the look, the decision that moved through him like something physical, like something he'd been waiting to make for a long time. She would see him again. She didn't know under what circumstances or in what configuration, in an attorney's office, across a table in a federal building, in some intermediate space that didn't have a name yet. She would see him, and she would feel the full weight of everything he'd cost her. And she would also, eventually, feel something else. She didn't know what. She gave herself time to not know. Pushed off the wall. I'm going to find somewhere to sit for about 20 minutes, she said. Holt nodded. There's a break room through the interior office. Someone left coffee. She didn't ask how he knew about the break room. With Holt, the answer was always some version of, because I've been here longer than you think and paying attention the whole time. And she'd gotten efficient at accepting that. The break room was small and lit by a fluorescent fixture that buzzed faintly. That sound again, the courthouse sound, the sound that had been the backdrop of the morning that started all of this. There was a folding table, 4 chairs, and a coffee maker, with half a pot of something that had been sitting long enough to thicken. She poured a cup anyway and sat down and held it with both hands and did not drink it. She sat in that room for 19 minutes. She counted them the same way. She'd counted the minutes in the van, on the way to Kendrick Street, which felt like 3 days ago, and was the same calendar day. She sat and held the cup and let herself be in a room with no one else in it for the first time since the courthouse, and she did not decide anything, or plan anything, or calculate anything. She just sat. At the 19-minute mark, the door opened. It was not Dante, whom she'd half expected. It was her father. Came in alone, which meant Brant's people had allowed it, which meant a deal had already been structured, which meant he'd moved fast. He always moved fast. She was understanding that now, integrating it into the version of him she was rebuilding in real time. He moved fast, and he planned ahead, and he loved her. She believed, in the way that people who prioritize their own survival sometimes loved the people closest to them, genuinely but secondarily, which was a kind of love that caused a specific kind of damage. He sat down across from her. He did not pour coffee. She looked at him. He looked like her father. He looked the man from the photographs she'd kept for 20 years, and the man in those photographs was not false. That was the part she kept arriving at and having to leave and come back to. He had been her father. He had also done what he did. Both of those things would live in the same body for the rest of whatever time they had. The deal, she said. Full cooperation. 18 months if everything holds. Supervised release after. He said it clinically. The way you said things when you needed to not feel them yet. I'll be required to remain in jurisdiction. Okay. Vera, I know, she said. I'm not going to ask you to. I know that too. He was quiet. His old hands were flat on the table. And she looked at them, and she thought about the garden he'd kept when she was a child, the tomatoes, the specific smell of turned earth on summer evenings, the way he'd taught her to thin seedlings, because being ruthless with the ones that wouldn't thrive meant more resources for the ones that would. She had thought about that garden at odd moments throughout her adult life without knowing why. She understood the why now, and it did not make the memory of the garden any less real. The bookstore, she said. I'm going to open it. Her father looked at her. Where? I don't know yet. She picked up the coffee, looked at it, set it down. Somewhere that isn't this city. Not immediately far, but far enough. She paused. I'll let you know the address. When I have it. He understood what she was offering. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't anywhere close to forgiveness yet, and she was not going to pretend it was. It was a door left open. The specific decision to not close something permanently when you weren't yet sure what you wanted it to be. Her father looked at his hands. Thank you, he said. He said it quietly, and she believed he meant it, and she let that be enough for now. He stood. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, and she thought he was going to say something else, something that would require her to respond, but he didn't. He just stood there for a moment, the way he used to stand in doorways when she was a child, not going, not staying, just present at the threshold, and then he left. She sat for another 6 minutes. Then she put the cup down and went back into the warehouse. The operation was fully underway now, the organized, exhausting machinery of a federal crime scene at full extension. She moved through the edges of it, finding Sable first, who was in conversation with 2 of Brant's agents, and looked up when Vera passed and gave her a single nod that contained more information than most conversations. She found Holt next, coordinating with a group she didn't recognize. New people, different agencies, the expanding universe of a case this size. She told him she was going outside, and he said he'd have someone with her, and she said she'd prefer not, and he looked at her and then said, all right. The outside air hit her like something physical, cold, salt-heavy, the water close and dark. She walked to the end of the spit, where the road dead-ended at the water's edge, and stood there with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the city across the harbor, the lights of it, ordinary and specific, particular geometry of a city she'd spent 8 years in and was now in the process of deciding what to do about. She heard footsteps behind her. She knew the footsteps. Dante came to stand beside her, not close, a foot of space between them, which was the same foot of space that had been between them in the warehouse when his hand moved that inch, and she'd let it be enough. He was without the vest now, without the ruined jacket, in a shirt that was dark enough that the stains didn't read unless you knew to look. His arm had been properly dressed. She could see the clean bandage below his cuff. Someone had finally made him deal with it properly. They stood at the water's edge for a while, without speaking. The city across the harbor did what cities did continued, indifferent, its own enormous ongoing thing. "How bad is it?" she said finally. "Your exposure. Bad enough." He said it without drama. "The attorneys will fight the prosecutable pieces for years. Some of it will stick. Some of it won't. The organization is gone, that's permanent. Properties, the accounts, the infrastructure. By the end of the week, most of it will be in federal custody or liquidated." He paused. "I've known for 8 months it was coming. I moved what I could. Legally." He paused again. "Mostly legally. Dante, the degree matters," he said. "I know the difference." She almost smiled. "You know what you can defend. That too." The water was dark and moved slowly against the pilings below them. Hear it, a low, rhythmic sound that had nothing to do with any of what had happened today and was doing what water had always done. "I'm leaving the city," she said. He was quiet. I'm not leaving because of you. I'm leaving because I want to start something that doesn't have this city's specific weight in it." She looked at the harbor, the bookstore. "I had the idea years ago. I put it down because it wasn't practical, and then I didn't pick it up again because I forgot I'd put it down, which is different from deciding not to do it." "Where?" he said. The same question her father had asked. "Different register. I genuinely don't know yet. Somewhere quieter." She thought about it. "Maybe close enough to the water that it smells like this. The salt. I've gotten used to it." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Can I ask you something? You've been asking me things all day. This is a different kind." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the water, not at her, and she had enough experience reading his profile to read it now, the particular tension in the jaw that meant he was organizing something, choosing words with more care than usual. "The 8 years," he said. "Not the decisions I made, not the things I kept from you. Just the 8 years. Were any of them," he stopped, started again. "Was any of it real? For you?" She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the water moved through several of its slow rhythms below them. "You know it was," she said. "I know, I thought so. I wanted to hear your version." She turned back to the water. "Yes," she said. "Most of it. The parts that were just us without the apparatus. The Tuesdays." She felt something in her chest move at that. The Tuesdays. The library. The tax attorney's address that had been a reason to come back. Those were real. "I built a life around a man who was managing things I didn't know about. And that makes some of those years feel like I was living in someone else's house without knowing it. Feeling itself was mine. I own that." He was very still beside her. "I'm not ready to know what that means," she said. "Not tonight. Probably not for a while. I know. I mean it. I'm not saying it to give you something to wait for. I genuinely don't know." "I know," he said again. And this time it sounded different, not patience, not strategy. Just a man acknowledging the truth of what he'd been given and not trying to expand it into more than it was. They stood for another while. The cold settled into her fingers, and she kept her hands in her pockets. Behind them, the warehouse was lit up now, fully operational, the federal presence having claimed the space completely. Could hear voices, engines, the distant radio communications of a large-scale operation in its early hours. "There's something I didn't tell you," Dante said. She waited. "The recording, the one Lucian had. The one I sent to Holt tonight." He turned to look at her now, and she turned to look at him, and they were a foot apart in the dark with the city behind them. It wasn't just Lucian's confessions. It was mine, too. She looked at him. "Your own confession. I made it months ago. When I understood where this was going and understood that if I went after Lucian without also accounting for myself, it was just leverage. It was just me protecting my position." He met her eyes steadily. "I didn't want it to be leverage. I wanted it to be a reckoning. So I put myself in the recording too. Everything I could document. Everything that was mine to own. She processed this. The recording in Lucien's jacket pocket. Holt taking it across the warehouse floor. Brant has it now, yes. You handed him your own confession. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. At the cut above his eye with its crooked dressing. The bandaged arm. At the face she'd spent 8 years learning to read, and was still learning, she realized, still finding new rooms in. That's why the archive scared you, she said slowly. Not because your records were in it. Because the records weren't enough. Anyone can have records. A confession is something else. Confession is a choice, he said. The records just prove what happened. Confession is about what you decide to do with knowing it. She stood with that. Let it move through her, the way the hard things had been moving through her all day, not stopping them, not accelerating them, just letting them find their level. The attorneys are going to have complicated feelings about that. Recording, she said. Yes. It makes your position significantly worse. Significantly. She looked at him. You knew that when you made it. Yes. Something in her chest moved again. Not warmth exactly, something more complicated than warmth. Something that had been around warmth, so long it had taken on warmth's shape, but wasn't quite the same thing. It was the feeling of a woman who had spent 8 years with a man's locked safe expression between them, finally seeing the inside of the safe. It was empty in there. That was the thing. Not hollow empty, the way a room is empty when it's been cleared out deliberately, when everything in it has been brought into the open. She looked at it and felt the strange tenderness that comes from seeing a person's full cost. I'll write you, she said, when I find the place. He looked at her. The bookstore, the address. When I have it. She paused. Don't take that as anything more than what it is. I won't, he said. It's just I spent 8 years with you, and you spent 8 years with me, and that's a thing that happened, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't just because it got complicated. It was always complicated. It was always complicated, she agreed. She turned from the water, took one step toward the warehouse and stopped, and looked at him one more time, at the whole of him, standing at the end of a road at the edge of the harbor, with the city across the water, and the warehouse full of federal agents behind him. And she took that image and kept it with the other images she was keeping, alongside the Tuesdays and the kitchen table, and the underground passage, and the concrete room, and all the other rooms of 8 years that had been real, even when she hadn't known the full shape of what she was standing in. Take care of the arm, she said. I will. She walked back toward the warehouse. She did not look back, but she heard him, a moment later, turn and follow, not following her, moving in the same direction, which was different, which was the only thing that could be true right now. And she understood that. 3 months later, the Varon organizations existed only in federal documents. Its accounts had been frozen, its property seized or sold, its operational structures dismantled piece by piece through the kind of patient institutional work that makes no dramatic sound but produces permanent results. Lucien Varon entered a plea and received a sentence that his attorneys would spend the next several years appealing, and those appeals would mostly fail. Reyes, as predicted, cooperated fully and received terms that reflected the depth of his cooperation terms that struck Vera, when she heard about them through the news coverage that reached her new city, as insufficient, and which she noted and set aside, because insufficient was still different from nothing. Her father served 14 months. She visited him twice during that time, once at the federal facility, once just after his release at a diner in a town midway between where he was required to stay and where she had opened her store. Both times they ate and talked about things that were not the architecture of the Bridgeway network, and both times she drove home afterward, feeling the complicated specific feeling of a daughter rebuilding something from material that had been damaged at its foundation, which is the hardest kind of rebuilding and also the most necessary. The bookstore was on a street 2 blocks from the water, in a city that was smaller than where she'd spent her marriage and larger than where she'd grown up, which seemed right. She'd spent 3 weeks painting the interior herself, which she'd been bad at and had not cared about being bad at, and the result was visible in the slightly uneven coverage on the back wall that she'd decided, eventually, to keep. She stocked it with the books she knew and the ones she'd always meant to read and some she'd ordered, based on descriptions, alone. which was a risk and a pleasure. She opened on a Thursday morning in late spring with no announcement and no ceremony, just the sign in the window and the door unlocked, and the particular quality of a space that has been prepared for people to enter. Sable came to the opening. Vera hadn't expected her. They'd exchanged information during the federal process and had spoken twice by phone. But Sable was not a person who made gestures, and showing up to a bookstore opening 4 hours from where she lived was a gesture. Came in, looked around, ran her finger along a shelf spine, picked up a book and read the back of it. Put it down. She bought 2 others. She drank the coffee Vera had made and told her the store was good, which from Sable was an unambiguous declaration, and left before noon. Holt sent a plant. She did not know how he had learned the address. She had not given it to him, and she decided not to ask. Plant was a large, healthy pothos, and it arrived with a card that said only good luck, which was the most words she had ever seen from Holt in a non-operational context. And she put the plant in the front window, where the light was best. On a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after opening, she was shelving returns when she heard the door. She had left it unlocked because she'd been expecting a delivery. Called out that she'd be right there without turning around, finished the shelf, and turned. Dante was standing inside the door. No bodyguards. No black vehicles outside. She could see the street through the window, and it was empty. Just ordinary Wednesday morning traffic. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck going somewhere else. He was in a coat she didn't recognize, dark, ordinary. He was thinner than she remembered, which was the months, or the process, or both. He was holding something. She looked at what he was holding, and her chest did something complicated, and she let it. The divorce papers, the originals, still with both signatures. He did not move from the door. He looked at her across the length of the store, the small, imperfectly painted store with the plant in the window, and the shelves she'd built with help from a neighbor, and the 2 chairs she'd put near the back because some books required sitting down, and he said nothing. She looked at him. She looked at what he was holding. She looked at his face, which was not the locked, safe expression, and was not the face from the underground passage, and was not any of the faces she'd catalogued across 8 years of marriage. It was a new face, or an old one that had finally come to the surface. She walked toward him. She didn't have a speech. She hadn't prepared one. She had spent 3 months preparing a bookstore and settling into a city and rebuilding a relationship with a living father and processing an experience that did not have a clean name. And she had not prepared a speech for this moment because she hadn't been sure the moment would arrive. And she'd decided that preparing for it would be its own kind of dishonesty. Took the divorce papers from his hands. She looked at them, at both signatures, at the date, at the judge's stamp that had been pressed onto them in a courtroom that already felt like someone else's life. She looked at the document that had sent 12 black vehicles to a courthouse curb and started the longest day she'd ever survived. Tore it in half, then in half again. She set the pieces on the nearest shelf, on top of a novel she'd read twice and would read again, next to a collection of short stories she'd been recommending to every person who came through the door. She set the pieces down with the same deliberateness she'd used to set the dead man trigger phone on the warehouse crate, the same quiet of a person who has made a decision and does not need to announce it. Then she looked at him. "I was about to make coffee," she said. He looked at the pieces of paper on the shelf. He looked at her. Something in his face moved, not the locked, safe expression closing, but the last of it opening, the final room, the one he'd been building toward in every moment since the underground passage. "Coffee," he said. "Yes." "All right," he said. She turned and walked toward the back of the store. She heard him follow, not closing the distance between them, just moving through the same space, in the same direction, on his own terms and hers simultaneously. She heard the door to the street close behind them both, with the particular quiet of a door that has no reason to make more noise than necessary. Outside, the Wednesday continued. The dog walker rounded the corner. The delivery truck found its destination. The water was 2 blocks away, and the air smelled of salt, and the plant in the front window caught the morning light and held it.